Before Ruhollah Khomeini boarded a plane back to Tehran in February 1979, Israeli flags were flying alongside Iranian ones at joint military facilities outside the capital. He would spend the rest of his life making sure that image became unthinkable. The hatred isn't ancient. It was built by specific people making specific choices. And it didn't have to go this way. For decades, Iranian oil flowed directly to Israel. Israeli military advisors walked the halls of Tehran's defense ministries. Mossad and Savak, Iran's feared secret police, ran joint operations with their counterparts in Tehran, sharing intelligence on mutual enemies across the Arab world. They were genuinely useful to each other. Then one man decided that usefulness didn't matter anymore. The question that should unsettle you isn't why Iran and Israel are enemies today. It's why they ever stopped being allies, and whether a conflict that was chosen once could theoretically be unchosen. Dismantling 30 years of shared work and oil agreements, not because the partnership stopped working, but because one man decided the revolution needed a villain. Like a business partner who burns the office down, not out of bankruptcy, but out of ideology. The whole thing required maintenance. Someone had to keep paying for it. This is unpriced risk. Everything made sense, right up until it didn't. 2 years after Khomeini declared Israel a cancerous tumor, Israeli cargo planes were landing in Tehran, loaded with American weapons, with Washington's blessing. The alliance was dead, the rhetoric was volcanic, and yet the man who'd personally demolished a 30-year partnership, who'd renamed a street in Tehran after a Palestinian militant, whose government handed the old Israeli embassy to Yasser Arafat, that man's military commanders were quietly accepting Israeli-brokered arms shipments to fight Saddam Hussein's army on the Western Front. The numbers aren't small. Israeli arms transfers to Iran during this period totaled over $500 million. The key middleman was Manucher Ghorbanifar, an Iranian arms dealer with connections on 3 continents, and a CIA file that reportedly described him as a serial fabricator, which didn't stop anyone from using him. This became the scaffolding of what we'd later call Iran-Contra, one of the stranger chapters in Cold War history. Israel's internal logic was ruthless and entirely rational. A grinding, bloody stalemate between Iran and Iraq served Israeli interests far more cleanly than any ideological purity. An exhausted Iraq couldn't threaten Israel's eastern flank. So Israeli officials quietly argued, sell the weapons, bleed both armies, stay out of the rubble. What this reveals is uncomfortable. Khomeini's public rhetoric and his commanders' private decisions were pointing in opposite directions at exactly the same time, like 2 separate governments operating inside the same building, each pretending the other didn't exist. The hatred was real. The transactions were also real. Both things were true, running in parallel, neither canceling the other out. So if 2 sworn enemies could do business when it suited them, you have to ask what exactly the conflict was actually protecting. Nobody who was in the room at the time has ever answered that question cleanly. While all that arms dealing was still humming in the background, Khomeini was already building something else, something that didn't depend on middlemen or back channels or anyone's goodwill, something designed to outlast him. The year is 1982. Israel has just invaded Lebanon, pushing north to drive the PLO out of Beirut. Khomeini sees an opening, not a threat. He authorizes the deployment of approximately 1,500 Revolutionary Guard soldiers to the Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon, not to fight Israel directly, but to find the Shia population that Israel's occupation had just handed him as an audience, and to build something from scratch. That deployment is the founding act of Hezbollah. Think about what that actually required. Khomeini had to look at a foreign country in the middle of a civil war, decide that Iran's revolution needed a permanent address outside its own borders, and sign off on it. That's a doctrine, not a reaction. 18 months later, on a Sunday morning in October 1983, a truck packed with explosives drove into the U.S. Marine barracks at Beirut International Airport. 241 American servicemen killed in a single blast, still the deadliest attack on U.S. military personnel since Vietnam. Khomeini's Bekaa Valley project had just introduced itself to the world, and the engine underneath it was almost elegant in its logic. Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon didn't pacify the Shia communities living there, it radicalized them. Every Israeli military operation generated fresh recruits. Every recruit justified more Iranian investment in training, weapons, and money flowing into the Bekaa. The occupation gave Hezbollah its legitimacy, and Hezbollah gave Iran its forward position. Like a fire that needs the wind to spread and the wind that needs the fire to move, neither side planned for this exact outcome, but both sides kept feeding it anyway. Khomeini died in 1989. The infrastructure didn't. What it needed next was someone who could take this blueprint and scale it across multiple countries at once. A young Revolutionary Guard officer from Kerman named Qasem Soleimani, and he was just getting started. 2 decades pass. No more open invasions, no more truck bombs in broad daylight. The problem doesn't disappear, it just goes underground. By the mid-2000s, Iran's nuclear program had become the central fact of Middle Eastern geopolitics, and both sides had quietly decided that whatever came next needed to stay invisible. The war that followed had no front lines, no press conferences, no official casualties. Take Stuxnet. Sometime around 2009 or 2010, a piece of malicious software found its way into the control systems at Iran's Natanz uranium enrichment facility. It didn't blow anything up. It told the centrifuges to spin at the wrong speed while reporting normal readings to the operators watching the screens. And roughly 1,000 centrifuges destroyed themselves from the inside. No explosion, no crater, no admission. The United States and Israel have never officially confirmed they built it, but nothing else in the world could have. Or at least, that's what the technical forensics strongly suggest, and it's difficult to read the evidence any other way. Then came the scientists. Masoud Ali-Mohammadi, shot dead outside his Tehran home in January 2010. Majid Shahriari, killed by a magnetic bomb attached to his car door in November of the same year. Dariush Rezaeinejad, shot by a motorcyclist in Tehran in July 2012. Real names, real streets, real mornings. Iran blamed Israel each time. Israel said nothing. Iran didn't stay quiet back. In July 2012, a bus carrying Israeli tourists in Burgas, Bulgaria exploded, killing 5 Israelis in an attack attributed to Hezbollah, operating on behalf of Iranian intelligence. Both states are capable of far greater destruction than anything described here. Iran has missiles that can reach Tel Aviv. Israel has capabilities it doesn't discuss publicly. And yet the attacks stay calibrated, enough to signal capability, never quite enough to force full-scale war. Like two people who know exactly how hard they can hit each other without the whole room getting involved. A choice made repeatedly by both sides, which raises the question of who exactly benefits from keeping it at exactly this temperature. Step back from the covert war for a moment, because to understand why centrifuges were spinning themselves apart in Natanz, you have to go back to where this whole conflict came from. Not discovered, not provoked, but deliberately constructed. Khomeini built the Iran-Israel conflict on purpose, not as a response to a genuine threat, as a frame. Iran shares no border with Israel. The two countries had never fought a direct war before 1979, never disputed a resource, never competed for the same territory. The enmity requires constant upkeep to exist at all, and Khomeini understood that better than anyone. So in 1979, he didn't just cut diplomatic ties. He made the hatred into a calendar event. Al-Quds Day, an annual state-sponsored rally calling for Israel's destruction, was his creation, a recurring public oath built into the schedule so that every Iranian leader who followed him inherited a ritual they couldn't cancel without looking like they'd surrendered the revolution itself. Not an accident, a load-bearing wall. But the same logic runs in both directions. An existential Iranian threat has justified military budgets, cemented Western diplomatic support, and given every Israeli government, whatever its political stripe, whatever coalition held it together that particular year, a unifying enemy when domestic politics threatened to fracture. Both states built coalitions that only hold together with the other caste as the villain. Remove the enemy and you don't get peace. You get internal collapse. And that dependency is self-reinforcing. The longer it runs, the more infrastructure it builds around itself, and the harder it becomes to imagine either state's politics without it. So the real question underneath all of this, is this conflict about religion, about survival, or about two governments that have quietly come to depend on each other's hostility to stay in power? Because those three answers lead to completely different futures. And when you look at who benefits every time the temperature rises, every intercepted drone, every assassinated scientist, every near miss that stops just short of open war, you start to wonder whether anyone on either side has ever seriously tried to end it. 45 years is a long time long enough for a conflict to outlive its founders, mutate past anyone's original intentions, and start generating consequences nobody ordered. By October 7th, 2023, that's more or less what had happened. Hamas, an organization Iran funds but has never fully controlled, launched the deadliest attack on Jewish civilians since the Holocaust. Tehran didn't order it, didn't stop it either. The proxy network had drifted far enough from its source that nobody was directing it anymore. It was deciding things on its own. Then came April 13th, 2024. For the first time in history, Iran fired directly at Israeli territory, over 300 drones and ballistic missiles in a single night. The proxy war both sides had kept at arm's length for 40 years briefly became something neither could deny. Israel's response was a precision strike near Isfahan, limited and calibrated, designed to say we can reach this, without saying anything more than that. Nobody wanted full war. Both sides needed the other to understand the message without being forced to answer it publicly. And underneath all of it sits the one variable that changes everything: Iran's uranium enrichment at approximately 60% purity as of 2024, weeks from weapons grade. That's the detail that makes the old calculations, built on proxy distance and plausible deniability, look like they were designed for a world that no longer exists. What you're left with is two states that were close allies 50 years ago, now locked in a condition neither one fully controls, built on decisions made by men most of their citizens never voted for. Nobody ever designed a way out. The Shah died in exile in Cairo. Khomeini died in Tehran with the conflict he built still running. 45 years later, it's still running. And the people in charge of it now didn't start it, can't end it, and may not entirely understand what they're holding. Thanks for watching Unpriced Risk. See you soon.